Thank you very much indeed. I would just like you all to acknowledge how we match our microphones.
That's right, to what we're wearing.
Completely by chance. You just need a dash of purple on you and then we're all set. So what a time in the world this is. I mean, even if you just take the events of the last week. So I guess to all of you, how would you define this moment in global affairs? Is it crisis, is it chaos, or is it just course correction? Shashi.
Oh, all of those. I thought we were going to talk about the phenomenon of de-globalisation that people are noticing as well around the world at this time, though I would argue that perhaps it's more a sort of slowbalization as they're slowing down many of the things that have happened in globalization, while a sort of re-globalization is taking place in some sectors and not in others. But it is certainly complicated by the crises you've mentioned. We've got 3 or 4 nasty little wars going on right now, each of which can get out of hand and can perhaps merge into the adjoining one. And that's particularly troubling. And then there's always the ever-present looming shadow of other places which haven't erupted yet, China, Taiwan, for example. So yes, there is an increasing sense of the center not holding, as it were, of things falling apart.
Mukulika, how would you define this moment?
I think we can talk about the global crises. The one that we talk about less, and that's why I'm going to mention it, is the increasing polarization between young men and young women, which seems to underlie, it's quietly happening. It's happening because of technology, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk about algorithmic AI and what it's doing to toxic masculinity being pushed silently. It is showing up in contexts as diverse as the United States, France, South Korea, India, where there is Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale is happening in real time. And I think in talking about global politics and the sort of international global order, this is a silent phenomenon, but it's absolutely toxic, and it's going to determine everything.
David, from where you stand, obviously at the head of a media organization, how do you see this moment?
It's great to have this conversation at a literary festival, and especially the Jaipur Literary Festival in this global context. At the same time, I almost think, talking with colleagues this morning about this panel, that the title of the session's backwards. So we're here doing Crisis in the Age of Chaos. It probably should be Chaos in the Age of Crisis, one colleague said. So just to give her full credit for that. But that is what I think many in the audience would feel. And that's sort of our experience of covering it, which we'll talk about in that technology context.
Yeah. Steve.
I think we are in a world in transition to a destination unknown. The liberal international order is in serious trouble. It is not giving up. It is still trying to fight back. At least the European side of it is. The American side is doing more damage to it than anybody else. The Chinese are coming in and trying to transform the liberal international order into something very different from what it is, into something that is very China-friendly, to say the least, if not completely Sino-centric. And they are getting quite a bit of progress in that direction. But will they succeed? We don't know. Will the European efforts to fight back have any result? We don't know. Will the Americans change course 3.5 years from now? We don't know. That's why I think we are heading to a destination as yet unknown.
And Bruno.
Yeah, so last year I wrote an essay for the New Statesman about the current state of the world, and the editors called it the age of danger, but I was very disappointed. I wanted to call it the age of destruction, which I think is the word that best describes our world. I have a new book that I just finished. Again, I wanted to call it an exit from our age of destruction, and the publisher wants age of disorder. I think we don't want to call things by what they really are, by the real names, but the real name is really destruction. You look around, you see destruction spreading, and it's destruction on a physical level, on a political level, on a moral level, on a civilizational level, and it keeps spreading.
So Bruno, do you think that we're seeing the return of different spheres of influence has the global West lost its grip?
Yeah, so why are we in an age of destruction? You could have two very different opinions. You could say it's the people outside the West that are creating this. It's the axis of autocrats, as Anne Applebaum would call it. And I think we have to be honest and to realize that the destruction is coming from within. By the way, as a philosophical point, I think world orders always collapse from within and not from outside. That's the lesson of Ibn Khaldun, which is an author we should be rereading. The chaos always starts within and spreads from within. And in the current moment, that seems to be what is happening too.
Steve, I wonder if you would just unpick a little bit more what you were saying about China and how what Beijing has to gain from international instability and what it wants.
Well, first of all, when we say China, when I say China, I'm really referring to the views of the Chinese Communist Party and in particular its supreme leader. Because as a country of 1.4 million people, a bit like India, there isn't one view. There are many views in that country, but there is only one view that is officially represented and allowed. And in that view, what Xi Jinping and the Communist Party would like is to get the support of the majority of the world, the global South, both in country terms and in population terms, to support a transformation of the international order from what they effectively call an international order of the West, by the West, for the West, into one that is representing the global South, with China as its natural leader. Sorry, India. From Beijing's perspective, they don't take it seriously enough. That they assume that they are the leader, and that is not going to be challengeable. Now, in that sense, even though China has historically been the greatest single beneficiary of globalization, the current crisis against globalization also brings in a lot of advantages, particularly in the way how Donald Trump is undermining everything that the liberal international order is supposed to represent, and the incapacity of the other Western democracies, Europeans in particular, in trying to bring back the Americans, to bring back into some resemblance of the liberal international order being anything more than just a myth. And the Chinese narrative has a lot of links, because if you come from the global South, if you are coming from that part of the world, do you not feel a sense of grievance in terms of how the West has been managing the world and global affairs with so much advantages they have gained from the liberal international order? And why not for a change? Well, you don't know whether the Chinese will succeed or not. And you don't know, at least for most people, that when that is being done, we will be more like the Chinese living in China under the Communist Party. Well, that is too far away. So I think that narrative does have a lot of traction, and if the democratic West cannot restore credibility to the liberal international order, then we are in serious trouble in the way that Bruno is describing. I don't know it's a foregone conclusion yet, but it's a serious challenge that for people who love democracy, human rights, and human dignity, have to take very, very seriously.
Shashi, I'm gonna let you respond to his challenge. Is India ready to lead in a multipolar world? And you've long argued for institutional reform. I mean, can those old institutions still cope in this world that we're in now?
Yes and no. I mean, I would say India never really aspired to lead by itself. It wanted, I think, a multipolar world where it would be one of several poles. I mean, you could imagine the US as a pole, China as a pole, the European Union as another, India as a fourth, perhaps something like Brazil in Latin America, perhaps one of the major African powers rising as well, that kind of world. We haven't seen a clear shift in that direction. We've seen something much more like what Steve is describing, which is a US partially in retreat, or as Bruno would put it, the West partially in retreat, and the rise of China with its unquestioned desires for hegemony. And that is something which others will challenge, not in order to become rival hegemons. I don't think we see ourselves in a competition with China to lead the world, but we would certainly be troubled by a world that China were to lead. And so we would certainly want to offer an alternative within our own capacities and our own limitations. I mean, today, China is 5 times the size of our economy. I don't think we can sit around speaking of a competition in that sort of sense anymore. But we have our capacities. We do lead in a number of areas. We've done better than China, things like space technology and satellites and so on. We haven't done as well when it comes to the economy, but in some sectors we're not doing too badly. In some sectors we have the capacity to catch up. So that's on the India-China thing. But on the larger proposition, I do think we're looking at a world in shift. I was only partly joking about globalization because many of the things about globalization we all took for granted are simply no longer in quite the same shape and form. And it's partly because, as Bruno pointed out, you've got countries backing off. I mean, the West has essentially abandoned, the US has abandoned the very principles it was advocating around the world from 1980 to 2010, let's say, as far as the global economy was concerned. It also seems to be abandoning many of the other things about the West that the world found attractive. I mean, now, students going to universities, are they going to find it that difficult to go to America? Maybe the siren song of China will start attracting more foreign students from developing countries. Who knows what implications that will have? So there are changes, partly self-inflicted by the West, partly China taking advantage thereof, that are restricted. Any talk of a globally understood and shared set of values that constituted the liberal international order. That's simply no longer there, but we are still short of multipolarity. And that's why I think, again, re-globalization is happening to some degree. There is a form of globalization. You've still got satellite flows around the world. You can still communicate across the globe with a click of a mouse and all of that stuff. So we haven't suddenly shut down the satellites and cancelled all the intercontinental flights, but we're no longer encouraging migration of ideas and of people. We're no longer encouraging institutions that can have an impact on countries far removed from where they're headquartered. All of these things are being fragmented now and changed. And into that space, China is rising, as Steve put it, with an alternative kind of hegemony, which we should all be very alert to.
I'd like to bring in Mukulika now, because you were talking about people, you were talking about the divide, the male-female divide, the generational divide too. And I wonder if citizens are adapting better than governments at the moment, and how the way that they deal with each other. You're right there, Shashi. How they deal with each other, it feeds into this whole narrative. If you think then as a whole that democracies can handle this kind of sustained crisis.
So I spend all my waking hours thinking about democracy within the context of a university. And I think the two things are linked. The university is a classic example of the kind of space where you can create cultivars, citizens who are informed, who learn to disagree well, who can trust fact from fiction, and form opinions that are progressive, that try and at least aspire to make the world a better place. We may think this is very far from democracy, but actually democracy, as we have seen, is not just a set of elections being held. It is about creating a certain kind of society. It is about learning to accommodate and a certain associated living, as John Dewey called it, the philosopher. Now, in order to create the failure that we talk about backsliding of democracy, and the backsliding is really not so much, there is backsliding of institutional structures of democracy, and we've seen that. We have elections but in name, and I would include India in that process of electoral backsliding. And that's particularly significant because India is to conduct elections so well. But the real backsliding is in the ability to create active citizens, to create democratic cultures, because it's not something that happens automatically. When you introduce democratic institutions, you don't create a democratic culture. Democratic culture has to be created through creating certain kinds of citizens, and you need certain kinds of non-political institutions, like the university. I would say, I've just written a short piece arguing why the London Underground is a classic example, why public transport creates a certain sense of civicness that contributes to democratic cultures and so on. So my worry really is that by shutting down spaces for debate in universities, which is happening the world over, in Britain, I think we're fighting a good battle and doing reasonably well. So if they can't go to the US, I think university students will come here, as we are seeing. There are
Don't charge foreigners 3 times what the British pay.
That's always going to happen. The British higher education system is predicated on that ever since Margaret Thatcher brought in the reforms she did. That's what caused it. That's the only ways universities can sustain themselves here, unfortunately. But if you're not going to have the spaces like a JLF, where we can disagree, we may agree violently, but disagree violently, unless we...
Non-violently, Mukulika.
Non-violent. Oh, no, you can't disagree non-violent. That's not the expression, Shashi Tharoor. I mean, you're the master of English expressions. But you have to... Sorry, I had to say that. You have to disagree violently, but be able to disagree well. And those spaces for disagreeing well, which we will talk about, no doubt, when we talk about social media, that is shrinking, and that's the crisis, as far as I can see.
And I mean, a lot of those spaces obviously exist within the media, so you're the head of an international media organization. In this information-saturated world with deep fakes and all the rest of it, are we, the media, the problem or the solution?
Yeah, when I looked at the panel today, I thought, do they have me there to speak up for America? Or no, even worse, I'm here to speak up for the media. So
we're on a bad wicket either way.
Here we go. But look, the younger the audience cohort, when we look at who consumes what we do, and we could be Sky News, but really institutional media in general, the younger the audience cohort, the less likely people are to trust institutions and government. And that does, I think, explain a lot of some of the democratic outcomes or even non-democratic outcomes that you see. And so why is that? Well, that's the crisis part of the panel discussion. I mean, how effective have institutions and government been in delivery for younger people for going on a generation now? In their judgment, not great. And so that's the audience that we're broadcasting to. At the same time, there's an enormous ability of that cohort to trust individuals, peers, creators, and that's not just because social media has enabled making an individual connection or what feels like an individual connection with a creator in the context of a festival like this, an author, but certainly in our context, someone presenting, someone reporting. What's changed 180 degrees is that the audience tend to trust a journalist individually, and then that trust is conferred on us as an institution, as Sky News or any other, rather than the person is trusted because they're associated with an institutional brand. That's how far we've come.
But
No, two dangers in that, aren't there? I mean, you've got, first of all, the great danger of misinformation, disinformation, spreading through social media. And the other is these silos where people are following and trusting only the ones they already agree with. And there really isn't an open space for discourse anymore if all you're responding to are people who are reinforcing your prejudices.
The problem with the elite, I mean, for my money, the problem with the elite discussion around mis and disinformation is that it's all about supply side, and it's not about the demand side of that there's an extraordinary demand for mis and disinformation. People, many people, want to be reinforced in their views. They demand that. They aren't interested, in many cases, in hearing the other side of the argument. They seek out reinforcing views, and that's sort of the world that we're all living in, and how we address that, if what we're trying to do is an unbiased job, well, ultimately you have to hold out hope that many people who demand mis and disinformation, they know. We find the audience is actually much more sophisticated than many institutional brands give it credit.
May I push back non-violently? Gently. Just to say this thing about demand, people want, they seek out disinformation. And this is where I think we really have to understand, and which I'm sure you do, on how artificial intelligence actually works. So if there is generative artificial intelligence, which produces information and disinformation, but there's algorithmic artificial intelligence, which is entirely driven by advertising revenue. So the disinformation, if it appeals, and if you have watched one thing, the algorithms make sure you will be shown more and more of that repeatedly. So it's not really entirely within the control of the consumer what the algorithm shows it on their screen. And this goes back to the point about toxic masculinity. You know, now it is, Laura Bates was talking about this, she's been writing about this for a long time, where if you're a 13-year-old boy and you open an Instagram account, they've now timed it, within 35 minutes, you begin to get Andrew Tate's content on your feed, whether, I mean, the child might not even know who he is, but it begins to show up. So, you know, I can see why, I mean, in a sense, the elite educated desire not to check facts and believe. In India, we call it the WhatsApp university, where you make up stuff and send it out to people. They are, in a sense, they want to see this stuff because it reinforces their prejudices. But there is also a technological push for disinformation that is reliant on revenue and money that we need to recognize.
Can I just bring in Bruno here, because I know that you are particularly interested in AI?
Well, just on disinformation, I feel I have to say that disinformation is not just coming from the WhatsApp groups and from the internet. Disinformation is very, very present in the mainstream media. And so when we talk about disinformation, well, sometimes I even hope there's going to be disinformation on the other side so that something can balance out. No one is representing objectivity or impartiality anymore. Let's be honest. What happened in the last 2 years in Gaza shocked me, not just because of what happened in Gaza, but in some respects because that I already expected. But what I didn't quite expect was how the Western world would look at Gaza, how we would talk about it. We live in these alternative realities, virtual worlds, almost like a video game that has no correspondence whatsoever to reality. In fact, on Gaza, I don't see any difference between right and left. I see a big difference between people who have been to Gaza, or at least to the West Bank, and people who haven't. People who have seen things with their own eyes, and people that live in these propaganda worlds. A philosopher I like called Leo Strauss used to talk that in the modern world, there's not just Plato's cave, there is a cave under the cave. But I think, it's worse now. Now there's like a full underground system under the cave. And the people live their whole lives in this underground system, never come to the surface to see the world as it is. Particularly in the United States, the way Gaza is talked about by almost everyone. It has absolutely no correspondence to the facts. I'm not even at some point disagreeing with the policy. I'm just trying to reestablish some adherence to reality, because that's where we live now. It's not a left or a right position. I think we could go back a few decades in the United States and see a policy that was more grounded in reality. On Palestine, Rashid Khalid used to say that the best American politician was James Baker. James Baker, chief of staff of Ronald Reagan, then he was Secretary of State with George Bush father, a conservative of the classical type. But he knew the region, he knew the countries, he knew the culture. Now people laugh if you say that it's important to know the region or to know the facts or to know the culture. It has no relevance whatsoever. Sometimes watching the Gaza coverage and the reaction in the West, I feel I'm watching a movie and I'm like pointing out, well, that spaceship just exceeded the speed of light, and you can't do that according to laws of physics. And everyone around is just saying, watch the show, enjoy the show. It doesn't matter what the facts are anymore. It's an experience of madness, to be honest. So I feel like, I think that the disease is much deeper than even some of the diagnosis.
Just bringing that together with AI in terms of thinking about this as watching a movie. Of course, it's so much easier now because you can be sitting in the Nevada desert killing people on the other side of the world. So how much has this use of AI in warfare really changed the way that we see this?
It's used in warfare. It's been widely used in Gaza. You can find out on the 972 magazine. It's an Israeli magazine about the use of AI in Gaza. But I'm also very worried the way it's been used already widely to shape our minds. Every child today that is using AI to talk as an imaginary friend, to ask advice, what should I do about that girl or that boy? I like that girl, I like that boy, and they ask AI what to do. But AI is not the voice of God. AI has been programmed with certain interpretations of the world. So we are becoming almost slaves of the people programming this AI. And this is while AI is still a chatbot. But now imagine when AI, and it's happening, you'll tell us how much it's happening already, when AI takes over journalism, when AI takes over advertising, when AI takes over factories, when AI takes over financial services. Whatever biases, whatever ideas, whatever goals are incorporated in the AI models will spread through our societies like a forest fire. We have no resistance, no immunity. It is a pandemic for which we are not prepared. And then we're going to start repeating the points, the ideas, the goals, the ends of life that we learned from the AI. How much of the internet is already shaped by AI? I would say about a third. Soon enough, it will be all of it. Where do we get information that is not being shaped by these models? Who is programming the models? According to which ideas, to which ideologies?
Well, Steve, just to bring in China here, because of course the narrative is very much controlled there.
I think there's a very interesting contrast. China is moving in the directions towards a totalitarian system again. It isn't totalitarian yet. And I think we have to bear in mind that it isn't totalitarian yet. It does not control everything totally all the time. But it controls most things, most narratives, most of the time. And China has less of a problem with AI posing the kind of issues that are confronting us here because they have that much more control. And what we have to move in our society to deal with it is that we have to have a much more open conversations among ourselves and with our political class as to what we are prepared to accept and what we are not prepared to accept. Because that's the point, I think, basic point underlying what Bruno has warned us about in terms of how AI can potentially take over. It can take over because our political process allow that to happen. Our legislative frameworks allow that to happen. Business people running AI companies, employing programmers to create AIs are able to do what they do because of our regulatory regime. And what we have to do is make sure that in the process of trying to ratify that, we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Though, if I can just say, because Steve has written, you've written about AI in a China context and the idea, or maybe the diminishing returns of of the central government trying to put the full economy behind a push into AI. And at the same time, the most disruptive AI to come from China became an open source one, became DeepSeek. So actually, if you want to be optimistic about this, an effort at mass control of it, ultimately, it would seem, even in a Chinese context like that, is losing to a more open-ended version of it, which is what DeepSeek was about. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's exactly the point I was going to make, if I can just chip in, Steve, because, I'm told, I haven't tried it myself, but I'm told by people that if you go on DeepSeek, the original version, and you ask about Tiananmen Square, it tells you I'm not authorized to answer that question. But since the open source is available, you can now program it to answer that question in ways that the Chinese inventors of DeepSeek would not have been happy about. And you can then get that answer if you're using DeepSeek in China because it's part of the system, isn't it?
Well, the Chinese government can control and change how DeepSeek operates.
Within China. Because if it's open source, you can change the source in America, in India, and wherever else, right?
If they basically say that DeepSeek has to provide certain politically correct answers, DeepSeek will have no choice but to respond to that. Otherwise, their operations will be in difficulties. Now, they haven't actually done it across the board. I think you are still able to get answers from DeepSeek, which are relying on the global internet for sources of information, which will therefore provide answers which the Chinese government would not like to have seen. They can rectify that. I mean, that is the point I'm underlying, that China is moving in the direction towards totalitarianism, but it isn't a totalitarian state of the digital era yet. But it has the potential to become that.
Mukulika.
I think what David and I were suggesting was that actually AI could prevent that totalitarianism. You see, once you have an open source code, what is to prevent somebody else in another country writing answers that China cannot control? I mean, you've got then a system which is China's technological triumph at the moment around the world. It's cheaper than ChatGPT, apparently more effective than ChatGPT does, trawls more things faster, whatever, all the things that AI celebrates. But it's open source in order to grow and prosper. And that very fact infiltrates other voices, opinions from the global internet and elsewhere, which China surely can't control. It's one thing to control the old internet where you could block sites in China. Can you control an actual AI program like this?
Well, I don't know about the technological side of whether you can control the AI program like that. But what I do note is that what we are dealing with is the issue of people wanting to believe what they want to believe in. And that applies even in the pre-digital era. I mean, I had experience of, in China itself, when a Chinese student who spent 6 months in a UK university returning to China asked me in front of the party secretary of that occasion which version of Tenements that she read about, the version she read about in the UK or the version in China was correct. And the party secretary very quickly jumped up and basically said, of course our version is correct. And she was taken a bit aback, surprise, surprise. And then she looked at me in kind of utter hopelessness and, what do you say? And what I told her was quite simply that, what do we teach you in British universities? Do we teach you what to think, or do we teach you how to think? You shouldn't ask us, any one of us, which is the correct version of history. You can make up your mind on that. But she was looking for a reassurance. It's so easy to simply fall back onto the easy option of sticking to the official one, which is how the Chinese government are more able to control that within China. They can't control it beyond China, but within China, they can.
Mukulika.
I just want to quickly respond to what you've just said, Steve, and I completely endorse what you're saying. I've learned so much from teaching Chinese students in UK universities. I'm amazed at the questions their choice to come and study here, the questions they're willing to pose, which you think really controlling the narrative, even within China, does not stop young minds from asking questions. And they come here and they seek and they read and they talk to students from all over the world. It puts your faith back in a university. I think that's what Chinese students here have taught me. But just to go back to the AI question and to link it to globalization, which you were saying at the start, when we talk, just so we don't lose sight of this, the artificial intelligence and programming and open source, we forget that there is a sort of silent globalization underlying artificial intelligence, which is entirely reliant on cheap, precarious, labor in the global south. It is in Venezuela and Madagascar and India where you bring certain language skills. You have data workers working on very poorly paid contracts, running the whole system that we call artificial intelligence. So it isn't a Frankenstein that is out there, but actually is reliant on cheap labor in the global south in exactly the same way that Nike sneakers were being stitched by little children somewhere, right? And we suddenly were very aware that the benefits in the global north of certain products were contingent on exploited labor elsewhere. Artificial intelligence is exactly that kind of resource as much as anything else. And the second thing that we don't talk about artificial intelligence enough is how to link it to climate change and how energy inefficient it is and how energy greedy it is. To run and cool servers takes more energy than we would think is conscionable in today's age of climate change. And yet we don't link these conversations. I just wanted to bring that in while we are talking about AI.
Just before we go to audience questions, which we'll do in a little while, I just wanted to bring this back to something more immediate, because this weekend has really seen an explosion of very, excuse the terrible choice of word, but of very bad news. So, excuse me, from Friday, and we see what Israel has been doing to Iran, the headlines today saying that the UK is now on a war footing. The terrible air crash in India, what's happening in the United States. On all of our minds, I think it just is, how do these deepening escalations, particularly I'm interested here in Israel, Iran, feed into the breakdown of the global order? And maybe, David, we could start with you.
Well, first, because Bruno had some compelling views on this. And the one thing I wouldn't do, because there was a lot in there that any of us might agree on, but the one thing I wouldn't do is generalize that there's like an Indian view, a Chinese view, or an American view. I think you look at the civil unrest in Southern California in the last 10 days and you know there's not one American view. In fact, that's really playing out on the street there. I think the other thing that is provocative that you mentioned is a bit of a leadership context. You brought up James Baker, who actually, one of those various boards that was mentioned at the start. I've been on his Policy Institute board for a number of years and gotten to know him a bit. And he was someone who is someone, now in his 90s, who made sure to understand and appreciate that part of the world in a way that many Americans, and certainly even American policymakers, might not. And the decisions that he might arrive at might not be the ones that all of us would choose. And yet, I think what's always been so compelling about Baker, and maybe this is the reason you bring him up, was that he had the ability to have a difficult conversation, even with whoever might be his boss, whether that was Reagan or Bush, or to sort of explain, like, I know you want to do this, but we have to do that. Maybe what we all worry about in this AI context is there room to have that difficult conversation? Is just the technological context so awesome that you could find yourself being that cog in a wheel, and there's no space to push back on it. But people are trying to push back on narratives that they don't believe. That's what I think I think that's something we can see just in the news coverage of the last couple of weeks.
Very, very quickly, but sure, I can be generous in that way, but I don't want to be too generous, because in the end, there's no general American view, but there is the view represented by the American government, the American state, which matters. It's not on the same level as a student at UCLA. It's the American state that sends weapons to Israel. It's the American state that has a certain policy around the world. And therefore, I have to judge America also in terms of what its government does, as I would judge China and as I would judge India. And I can't just look romantically at the student in an American university. By the way, I was at Georgetown in December, gave a talk on Gaza. Students participated. But at the end, they came ask me, we know you have been very outspoken. We'd like to be outspoken. Can you give us some advice? Because we're terrified. We're starting our careers. They were terrified about one specific thing, by the way, being kicked out of the university after their parents sacrificed their life saving to send them to Georgetown. So in an impossible position. And I was thinking, well, why would you put an 18-year-old in a position where he's going to be kicked out of university for holding an opinion?
Listen, we're going to go to the audience now. If I could just...
If I could just push back non-violently at Mukulika's point. One of the difficulties with AI today, of course, is it has the capacity to do these poor techno-coolies in the global south out of a job, because AI can train itself to write its own software, to do all the coding these poor chaps are doing, and soon enough, the global south's sort of techno-labor may find itself unemployed as AI takes over its own development.
There's always going to be need for answering, all the different demands that we are now putting on AI are continually new and have to be renewed. The questions, Bruno was talking about this earlier, it's not the voice of God, it's the voice of programmers, it is the voice of people who are constantly having to respond to change. So it's not as if they've done the sort of techno labor and now it's over and now there's this Frankenstein sitting there
rewriting itself.
Audience, I'm going to jump in before Shashi completely takes her.
No, I'm sorry.
If I could just ask you to keep your questions as short as possible and tell us which panelists they're addressed to. So yes, we've got one there. Just hang on, I think there is a microphone coming to you. Just there, give a wave. There we go. Well, that's because I'm sitting next to him, and I can give him a little... Thank you. Yeah, non-violent nudge.
So great conversations on artificial intelligence and the way AI is bringing about change, whether it's agentic AI coming in, and Dr. Tharoor was saying of how they can now start making agents to work for many other human resources. So my question is, you all spoke about the good of AI and the bad of AI. It's very similar to, in terms of business, can be a force of doing good, or it could be crony capitalism. But Tata's, for example, were a force of doing good, but there are a lot of businesses which are not ethical, etc., right? So to the panelists, the question would be, going forward, AI is going to be there for generations to come. How would you see artificial intelligence, the way it will be force of doing good, and what would be some of the challenges you mentioned in terms of the data governance, or globally, what could be some of the challenges that AI could do? But more importantly, on the positives of AI, how would you see in business, universities, or just globally, how would you see AI coming about? Thank you.
Who are you directing that question to?
It could be to anyone in the panel.
I would add in the Chinese dimensions to it. For the Chinese government, what AI should or should not do will be measured first and foremost about whether it is going to be beneficial to the Communist Party of China. Not whether it is going to infringe on human rights, not whether it is going to have impacts on global stability and order and how we understand things correctly in ways that are helpful to us as humanities. It is simply what works best for the Communist Party of China. And that, we're talking about a very, very major player, and that constrains the effects of what we in the democracies can actually do if on the assumption that we can all do the right things, which is a very, very big assumption that we will be able to do that to begin with.
Bruno, do you want to weigh in on that very briefly, please?
I mean, the good is pretty straightforward. Throughout human history, intelligence has been the scarcest resource. We don't have enough of it, with the exception of this room, but well understood. The danger, I think, is inequality of a radically new kind that could separate the human species into the superhuman and the underhuman. In fact, we'd lose track of the human in the middle. We have to be more aware of, I say this as someone who's supposed to be center-right, we have to be more aware of the problem of inequality in our societies. I think there was a window of time where our societies could deal relatively well with inequality, but with these new technologies, inequality has become extremely dangerous. We see that in the United States, of course, where Silicon Valley has so much money to spend on everything. I see many of my friends, intellectuals, journalists, that are seduced by the Silicon Valley money, and they have started to have different opinions. And sometimes I wonder why, but I kind of suspect why.
Do we have some more questions here? Yeah, we've got someone there. And then after that, can we make sure to ask a woman a question, please? Thanks.
Yes, I'm from Pakistan. Being a liberal in Pakistan is a very problematic term. So ideologically driven liberals and left in Pakistan look for Indian liberal figures for inspiration, like Amartya Sen, Mukulika, Shashi. But some of us have been disappointed by Shashi recently told BJP's line, promoting the BJP's agenda on recent Pakistan-India combat. So Mukulika, any other liberals Pakistani can look up to for inspiration in India, since Shashi's liberal credentials are compromised now. And just related to Steve, Pakistan helped India, China, establishing their technological supremacy by downing 2 or 3 French Rafales, which is supposed to be the most advanced, one of the most advanced Western fighter jets using J-10 Chinese jets, and of course, technological satellites intelligence. So is China going to reward Pakistan, because Pakistan is always struggling with financial inflows, perennial issue we have. And just a disclaimer, liberals in Pakistan are ideologically driven, are very critical of Pakistan army because of curtailing democratic freedom in Pakistan.
First, I'm delighted that the Pakistani liberal exists. I think the world could use a few. The world could use a few. Look, I honestly don't think this is about liberals versus conservatives or even Congress and BJP. I'm certainly not in the BJP. It's frankly about ordinary human beings against terrorism being used as an instrument of state policy. And frankly, I will speak against terrorism as long as I can. And I will speak for my country irrespective of who is ruling it. I've actually spoken to some of the victims of that horrible terrorist attack. One of them was from my state. And there is no justification for the fact that Pakistan continues to shield, nurture, provide safe havens to, finance, train, radicalize, arm, and deploy these nasties to do damage to innocent civilians on a holiday. There's simply no justification. And I will denounce it without losing my liberalism, I hope, in the process.
This is what a liberal nonviolence looks like, ladies and gentlemen. I have to, since I've been named, I have to respond, and also because I think I am the only Indian academic to have lived and worked in Pakistan for over a year, many years ago. So I have a better acquaintance, perhaps, as an ordinary citizen of liberal Pakistanis. So I am going to say that one thing that I have learnt from knowing my friends in Pakistan, and indeed watching my own government, I'm an Indian citizen, is that the one thing as a liberal you're required to do in any context is ask questions of your government. Thank you. So if liberal Pakistanis are willing to hold their government and their army and their ISI's feet to the fire to ask what on earth is going on with taxpayers' money and terrorist groups, that is a Pakistani liberal, and I know they exist. Likewise, Indian liberals need to ask questions of their government, not swallow what they are told, to ask why tourists cannot be protected in Kashmir.
Can we send the microphone here?
I just got the microphone, may I?
Yeah, after that it's there, as I keep saying. Okay, lady in red.
I must
say I am totally befuddled and somewhat disappointed to see such a seminal panel, and all of you except one, perhaps, following the monomaniacal refrain of anathematizing China. Tharoor, you're renowned for mentioning in your historical talks before that there was a time when China and India alone had the largest chunk of the world's GDP. And if Mr. William Dalrymple is in the audience, he had once quoted in the era of the Buzatians era, when the China sent a whole a big flotilla and they came back with one, was it an elephant or a giraffe, to show to the world that they have not colonized a single nation, yet they took lots of gifts for them. And that was in a way a slap on the face of those who had colonized.
I'm sorry, we need to move to the question.
Well, think of Tibet to begin with, sir.
Yeah, that is true. But I think China was completely indentured ventured and the cartel of opium wars. And for that nation to, without firing a shot, to come to this level of economy, one should at least pay some credence to what they've done. And I think I'm saying simply because of the previous history. We heard Saddam Hussein was a big, anathema to the world, and when we discovered there were no weapons of mass destruction, which we were made to believe that there were.
I'm not sure if you want to respond to that, or we will.
Steve?
Xi Jinping will echo and say that the Chinese have not one single imperialist genes in the Chinese gene pool. And China had, in its 5,000 years of history, never invaded anybody else. And we are talking about a small kingdom in the Yellow River Basin, which over 4,000 years expanded into a continental-sized country.
Exactly.
And all this time, everybody simply say, I love to be Chinese. Please, could I be a Chinese citizen? Reality is that China's imperial history was like everybody else's imperial history. The Chinese empire historically behaved like empires everywhere, anywhere. The Chinese economic miracle of the last 40 years was absolutely amazing. And that's something we do acknowledge. It's a simple fact. But that tremendous economic miracle was not simply the result of what the Communist Party did. Because for the previous 30 years, the same Communist Party in power kept the Chinese economy at roughly the same level as the economy of North Korea. And it's when the Communist Party loosened control, invite the outside world in particular the Chinese diaspora in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and in the rest of the world to help with that economic development and engage with the rest of the world, that the Chinese economic miracle was delivered. That also is a fact. And we have to acknowledge that too.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Regarding the conversation with AI, so I am a software developer and I work with AI research. With the conversation that was happening, I have a few things to point out. So you said the dangers of AI. So working with AI, I know that nowadays anybody can ask AI how to train AI. So it's really simple, it's really accessible. So the conversation should more be related to the guardrails that we put on it and how we are going to limit. So you've been asking about the open source of DeepSeek. And these things, I think we have options to bypass. We can, all the resources are easily available. So my question is, when is the conversation regarding these guardrails going to come up?
To me, the danger about the guardrails is that what we've seen, and I think some of the scenarios that have been discussed, is that you usually don't get the outcomes that you or we might want from that. It'll be about reinforcing official messaging or reinforcing specific political priorities, and that may not be the outcome that we want. I mean, the decision we're all struggling with here is not whether these technologies are going to take hold or we're going to have them not. It's going to be how do we manage these technologies that are largely beyond our control, I think.
I wondered now if we could just give you all a chance just to wrap up, really, with a thought on resilience. And so we leave this on a note of hope. I wonder what each of you see as the most hopeful force, be it institutional, cultural, ideological, even technological, that could lead us through this age of chaos. Bruno.
I'll go last.
You'll go last. No, I think it's also a very optimistic age. It's an age where new possibilities are being opened up. I think the West, at its peak, was a great civilization with great achievements. I suspect it's coming to an end. But that is not necessarily a bad thing. Other possibilities will open up. There will be many different paths being experimented in different parts of the world. I like it to compare to a group of people that arrive at a desert island and they separate in groups and they go look for water. You should actually be thankful that some people are taking a different path, going to the mountains or going to find a river somewhere else, rather than forcing them to take the same path you're taking. The more paths are being taken, the more chances you'll actually find water. No, water here could mean different things. So I don't think we should be angry that India has its own civilizational path, China has its own civilizational path, Africa has its own civilizational path. More chances that we find valuable, precious things for human life. And that is how I see the current moment and the problem of multipolarity as you started.
Thank you. Steve?
I don't know about what new technological development in the coming 12 months can change us. I just don't know. I'm not in that area. I'm a political scientist. What I would hope that we will be able to do in the next 12 months is to have a greater awareness of the kind of challenges that technological advances can throw in the way of how we as human beings engage with rights of individuals, dignity of individuals, and respect of individuals, and find a ways to have a conversation that can find a form of way to reconcile the two. I don't think we should stop the technological advance. I think AI can be extremely helpful. We want to capitalize and benefit from it. But we also need to find ways to make sure that it doesn't do the damage to what really matters to us as human beings.
David?
It's interesting. The panel is supposed to be about crisis and chaos, and we only talked about AI, which sort of tells you like this moment that we're in. So if you want to be optimistic about something, but every other technological move, certainly in media, led to some similar diagnoses. I mean, the arrival of television, radio, maybe the printing press had similar trends at the start. Now this one seems set to be very different. But with that as context, I mean, people do find that these equally unlock certain ability. We know more now than we did before these arrived, and so why is that at all hopeful? If people have never had more ways of expressing themselves and they have never felt less heard, and so here we are at a literary festival which is fundamentally about expressing yourself. All of these open up new ways for people to ultimately be heard. And if there's one thing that knits all the questions together, it's people worried that they're going to be buried under some algorithmic blob that's going to cause them to continue to not be heard. I'm not so sure we know that that's true.
Thank you.
So I'm a social anthropologist, and we study communities and human societies in great detail in all their aspects. So my response to your question, Georgina, is really quite simple and doable, and I think any of us can relate to it. There is a crisis, there is chaos, but the one thing each of us could do is ensure that we have a membership of what Robert Putnam, the political scientist, called a bridging group. Belong to a group in which you are with people you don't know, you may disagree with, who will challenge you, who will force you to think in different ways. And in many ways, I think, say a gardening group, where you can get together with people to look after your local public garden. That's your only task, but you have a common goal. And you come in contact with people who you will not otherwise come in contact with in your polarized worlds, right, in our echo chambers. And if we can build something together, grow something together, we may learn what I've been calling the virtues of cultivation: patience, hard work, vigilance, hope. Without these four things, we are not going to be able to face any crisis and chaos. So cultivation and bridging groups, that would be my response.
For answering your question, I can't resist reacting to Bruno's comment about the imminent extinction of Western civilization. You know, Mahatma Gandhi was asked, what do you think of Western civilization? And he replied, I think it would be a good idea. But I think, you know, this conversation, and particularly the way, as has been pointed out, we all ended up in AI. It's striking because 30 years ago, I was asked to keynote the Berlin Festival of Literature. And in those days, globalization was all the rage. And I warned against the globalization of the human imagination. And today, I wonder whether the time has not come for me to answer your question by saying the way out is to resist the AIization of the human imagination. If in a literary festival here, we can't reaffirm our precious, unique human quality to imagine for ourselves, imagine realities, alternative realities, ideas, disagreements, violent and non-violent as they may be, and to preserve through that individual imagination our capacity to overcome all these processes of crisis, of chaos, of the hegemonization of either China or AI, whatever it may be. If we can stand up for that individuality that marks us out as human beings, that, I think, might be the way forward for each of us to survive this age of crisis.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all.